Good afternoon. I'm Olympia Mayor Cheryl Selby, and on behalf of the Olympia City Council, I'd like to welcome you to the City of Olympia's virtual town hall series on racial justice. This is the second in a series of town halls on racial justice, and today's will focus on racial justice and economic opportunity. Last week, we held our first town hall on racial justice and the justice system. We were happy to have had over 300 attendees and received almost 100 questions. I want to acknowledge at this time the frustration that we're all feeling with the limitations we have on meeting face-to-face in a format where we could handle more and varied questions. I want to assure you, though, that we are logging all of your questions in consideration of the work ahead for City Council and staff. This work includes not only scoping the work plan for our new Human Rights Advisory Commission, but also with a mind toward re-envisioning economics, education, public health, and public safety in our community through a racial equity lens. At this time, it's my honor to introduce my council members that are with us today. I see on the screen, I'm trying to find everybody. I've got Councilmember Madrone, so Danny Madrone. I've got Councilmember Jim Cooper. I've got Mayor Pro Tem Jess Bateman. I've got Councilmember Renata Rollins, and I've got Councilmember Clark Gilman. And a minute ago, we had Councilmember Lisa Parsley, but
I'm still here by phone.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you, Lisa. So we have over 200 people that pre-registered today, and I want to acknowledge that we have leaders from across many nonprofit groups, elected officials, both current and retired, as well as staff from Olympia and many other cities in our county. I also see on this sign-in list many folks that work hard within our local economic system. I know each of you have been working overtime to grapple with the real-time effects of the COVID crisis on the livelihoods of our citizens. So thank you for attending this afternoon. We will definitely need leadership across all sectors of our community to recover post-COVID in a way that brings everybody forward and gives them all the opportunity to thrive. The goal of this series of virtual town halls is to provide a gathering space for the community to learn and understand the issues at the center of institutional racism and the opportunities for positive change driven by the Black Lives Matter movement. At this time, I'd like to ask my council mates to mute and turn off their video so we can center the voices of our moderator and panelists. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, our Strategic Communications Director, Kelly Peirce-Brosseth, who will introduce our esteemed panelists. And council will be back at the end to ask some other questions for our panelists as we wrap up. So we'll see you later.
Thank you, Mayor Selby, council members. Again, I really want to thank you and City Manager Jay Burney for your support with for this series and for the ideas of moving this forward. I want to begin by acknowledging our panelists and Megan Matthews, Engagement Manager for Poverty Reduction with the Governor's Work Group, Merritt Long, co-founder of Learning Seed Foundation, and much more. Clinton Petty, he is a former director of unemployment insurance with the Employment Security Department, and much more. And James Sultan, president and CEO of the Sultan Center. I'll introduce all of them in more depth in just a minute, but first I want to do a little orientation for those attending. Just a reminder that this event will last approximately 90 minutes. We're going to hear briefly from our panelists, about 5 minutes each of them, and then we'll open up for about 15 or 20 minutes of questions from the community. A reminder that all of the town halls are recorded and will be posted to the city's website, so you can view them again. If you know folks who have missed the opportunity, they also can view it. And another reminder around this is that these conversations in this series are on hard topics, and our panelists are bringing their experience and their honesty to the table. So I would like to let people know that you shouldn't be surprised if you hear things that make you uncomfortable, that might not jive with your experience of the world, but the world is round and holds lots of surprises for all of us. And but I applaud your presence here and your willingness to listen to this conversation. So I will begin by introducing our panelist, Megan Matthews, and letting her plant her flag. So Megan works for the Department of Social and Health Services in the Economic Services Administration. She has had a career with the state of Washington since 2008 as a support enforcement officer with the Division of Child Support Services. She is currently the engagement manager supporting the governor's poverty reduction work group, whose work is to significantly reduce poverty in Washington state in a way that eliminates disparities. She's committed to pursuing and living principles and values of equity, diversity, and inclusion. She earned her master's degree in public administration from the Evergreen State College. She held certifications as a prosecute change management practitioner, as a diversity professional, and as a diversity executive. And she is the inaugural chair of BUILD, which is Washington State's first Black community business resource group. She is passionate about social justice and ensuring fairness for everyone, particularly for the next generation, which includes her 2-year-old daughter and her nieces and nephews. So Megan, I will let you plant your flag in this conversation.
Okay, thank you for having me here. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation on topics that impact us all. I wanted to first talk about, it's important that we think about how do we determine poverty. The federal guidelines that were established in 1960, most experts agree that those are, they're outdated. And so more people are leaning towards a definition that's based on actual needs that pertain to the needs that we experience today. Governor Inslee's Poverty Reduction Work Group was created via directive in November of 2017. It's co-led by several state agencies in partnership with tribal and urban Indians, state, racial, and ethnic commissions, employers, community-based organizations, legislators, advocates, and philanthropy groups. A steering committee made up of 22 people reflecting the demographic and geographic experience of poverty. They're the ones that kind of lead and guide the work, which is a new model where we let people with lived experience direct our decisions in our policymaking, and it's one that I strongly advocate for. So right now there's a draft of the poverty plan, and we are getting feedback on that plan, and we plan to present that towards a little later on this year. The federal poverty standards are a lot lower, but UW, the University of Washington, they have this calculator, and they determined that in Thurston County, a household of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-aged child would need an income of $60,518 in 2017 to be self-sufficient. In Olympia, the Black population is about 3.6% of the population, and 31% of those in poverty by federal guidelines, not the updated guidelines. 1.8% is indigenous, but they're 32% of the poverty in Thurston County. 9.2% of Olympia's or Thurston County's population is Latino, but they make up 35.7% of the poverty in Olympia. Statewide, 1/4 of our population is in poverty by ALICE standards. And so with the poverty reduction work group, we understand that poverty is complex, that it's not an easy fix. And so there's multiple strategies that we want to propose to tackle poverty. There are 8 strategies, and there are several recommendations on each strategy. The first strategy is understand structural racism and historical trauma and take action to undo their harmful effects in state policy and programs. The second is to make equal space in decision-making for people and communities most impacted by poverty and inequality. The third is target equitable education, income growth, and wealth-building opportunities for people with low incomes. The fourth, strengthen health supports across the lifespan to promote the intergenerational well-being of families. The fifth is address the urgent needs of people experiencing homelessness, violence, mental illness, and/or addiction. The sixth is build an integrated human service continuum of care that addresses the holistic needs of children, adults, and families. The seventh is decriminalize poverty and reduce reliance on the child welfare, juvenile justice, and criminal justice systems. And the eighth is ensure a just and equitable transition to the future of work. So with that, I will thank you for this time and hand it back over to hear from some of the other panelists.
Thank you, Megan. That's great. My next person to introduce is Merritt Long. Merritt grew up in the segregated South in the 50s and 60s. He has firsthand experience with Jim Crow laws, the colored drinking fountains, segregated schools, and hand-me-down books, and riding in the back of the bus. He is a graduate from the prestigious Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. He moved to Seattle, where he had a 37-year career with the state of Washington, which included serving as the executive director or chairman of 4 state agencies, including the Washington State Liquor Control Board, the Washington State Lottery, Washington State Human Rights Commission, and the Washington State Board for Vocational Education. His private sector work includes serving on the boards of 2 banks. He was the founding director of the Thurston First Bank in Olympia, and he has served as the vice president of the vice president of the Unibank Board of Directors, and Unibank is based in Linwood. He's also worked as a consultant for Pfizer and 2 other corporations. On top of all of that, Merritt is an author, and his memoir, My View from the Back of the Bus, is soon to be published, I understand. So I would like to offer you the 5 minutes to plant your flag.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Selby, Mayor Selby, City Council members, City Manager, community leaders, business leaders, labor organizations, to name a few. Thank you, and thank you one, thank you all. Speaking of thanks, as Megan indicated, it is also my honor to be before the council today to share with you my thoughts and ideas on racial justice and economic opportunity. I, quite frankly, was reluctant to participate. The reason being, I've seen different initiatives from city government, county government, or state government based on national or state or regional crises. In this particular case, the murder of George Floyd was a turning point in this country. And I just didn't know whether or not this was the city's response to bring attention to act as though they have a concern about issues affecting folks of color, particularly Black folks, beyond the criminal justice system. And based on my experience and the things that I've done, I just didn't know how serious the city was. But Kelly is rather persuasive. And when she said her brother Les had recommended me, she knew she had me then because I couldn't say no to Les, okay? But before I begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Kelly and all of the staff that have been working with her on putting these forums together. They have done a marvelous job. They've been on time, on task, on target, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree with this characterizations. There are 3 points that I want to make today and will emphasize. 1, commitment. 2, silence is not golden. 3, how can you win the race if you're not in the race? Commitment. After working Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I lost my screen, but that's okay. I'll come back as long as you can hear me. Okay. After working almost 40 years in the public and private sector, there's one basic truth that I've come to learn and realize, and that is, unless the decision makers are fully committed to the issue or issues or policies at hand, they will not succeed. In this particular case, I'm talking each and every city council member, the mayor, the city manager, the city council staff, the staff of the city. There has to be congruency up and down the chain of command to carry out whatever the city wants to do in any of these subject matter areas. Number two, silence is not always golden. Over 25 years ago, I was meeting with former city councilman Sam Smith, former legislator Sam Smith, and he had just left a council meeting and he was rather subdued, and he and I were working on some criminal justice reform issues, and I said, well, Sam, what's wrong? You don't seem like yourself today. And he said, Merritt, a silent friend got me today. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, two individuals that I've been working with for years, I always thought that we had a good relationship and a lot of give and take, but they've been meeting over the last month with two other council members. My position on the issue was misrepresented. Those two members that I thought were my friends didn't do anything to change that because of their own selfish interest in what they wanted. They didn't want to take the risk. They didn't want to speak up or speak out. What a silent friend. Not someone you want in the clutch. The third something that I wanted to mention is if you're not in the game, if you're not participating, if you don't have access to the opportunity, how can you win? How can you win the race if you're not in the race? And that took me back 35, 40 years ago in Bessemer, Alabama, black and white TV. There's a newspaper, there's a news reporter interviewing former head coach Jack Gaither, who was the head football coach at Florida A&M University. And the reporter asked Jack, he said, Jack, how does it feel to be considered to be the first black head football coach in the National Football League? Jack paused for a moment, smiled, and said very simply, if I'm not in the race, I can't win the race. I'm glad to be in the race. And I think that's what we all want, black folks, brown folks, people of color, white folks. But we want to have a chance to participate. No special stuff, no inside lane necessarily, no leg up, but just make sure I have the opportunity to compete. Later, I plan to add a little more color and a little more specificity around that. But for that concludes my 3 points of commitment. Silence is not golden. And if you're not in the race, how can you win the race? Thank you.
Thank you, Merritt. And I'm glad we were able to convince you to come join the conversation. Next, I'd like to introduce Clinton Petty. Clinton is a retired Division Command Sergeant Major in the U.S. Army. He served in Vietnam and other special operations. He retired from the Employment Security Department as Director of Operations with over 1,800 employees and served as Director of Washington State's Unemployment Insurance Program, responsible for over $2.8 billion. His last responsibility was to establish one of the most technically advanced service delivery operations in the nation for the department, and he was twice awarded the Distinguished Manager Award by 2 governors. He attended Russ College in Holly Springs, Mississippi. He has a bachelor's in business from the University of Maryland. He is a graduate of the University of Washington's Career Executive Program and Executive Studies Program, and he has numerous leadership and management awards, including having been published in the National Perspective. Clinton serves as trustee, director of operations and training and facilities planning for Risen Faith Fellowship Church here in Olympia. He's married to Pastor Charlotte Beeler, is father of one daughter, Angela, grandfather of 3 children, Justin, Jasmine, and Jared, and grandfather of McKinley and Easton. Clinton's mic is a little low, so I'm going to ask our audience to please listen closely. Thank you. You're muted right now.
He's muted.
Yep. Yep. Oh, there you are.
Okay,
There you are.
I am going to come from a different. Social injustice is financial matters to life. It governs who we become. It governs what we do. It governs everything about us as human beings. I saw that up front in the military. When they were trying to break up the military and to bring it back to a position where people that were serving got the same treatment. Let me show you something. Here, just recently, on TV, I'm going to take you back to your TV room when George Floyd lay dying under the knees of a white officer who would bear, at the same time, cause this person to lose his life because he couldn't breathe. The officer didn't seem to have any concerns or mercy on another human being. What am I saying? I'm going to explain that a little bit later. But what is key for us as we move to the future, if we don't change our understanding of what social justice is, we're all going to fail. There can't be any rules for one race of people over another. We're all one race. We are human beings, and I've discovered all of us have blood flowing through our veins. And the key is we have discovered with this virus, we all need each other. There is not one thing that's going on with this virus that we don't need from somebody else. We need help, we need our protection, and we surely need to.
I think we might have lost there.
Faintly, we can hear you faintly.
Yeah, we can hear you only faintly. No, I'm not hearing you very well. I'm sorry, do you, if you don't mind, maybe while you're working on, we can work out the sound issues and we can move to Jim. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm going to introduce Dr. James Sultan, who currently serves as the president and CEO of the Sultan Center, a multidisciplinary research and consulting firm based in Orangeburg, South Carolina. As an experienced professional with a diverse background, Dr. Sultan helps enable small business and startup owners to succeed. The firm provides a wide range of support for individuals, institutions of higher learning, and small businesses. I do want to point out that, among other things, Jim has a storied career in higher education, and I want to make sure I bring that forward. He has held the post of Executive Vice President for Administration, Operations, and Information Technology Services at Brookdale Community College. He was a visiting Senior Presidential Fellow at the Fairleigh Dickinson University in Teaneck, New Jersey. He He was the executive director of the State of Washington's Higher Education Coordinating Board from 2004 to 2007, where he led that state agency that was responsible for student financial aid, the formation of a statewide master plan, and the development and implementation of higher education policy for all of the colleges and universities for the state of Washington. He also has served as the executive director of the New Jersey Commission for Higher Education, the senior academic officer for the Colorado Commission for Higher Education, and he has been the special assistant to the president of the University of Wisconsin System for Minority Affairs. He's also been a faculty member at Howard University, which is his alma mater. So that's just a little bit of his higher education experience, and as we talk about economic opportunity, he has also been formally served as the co-owner and president of A Bud and Leaf Inc., a I-502 retail store in Olympia, Washington. The store was established by he and his wife in conjunction with the movement to end the prohibition on marijuana. And he was able to do that because he was one of the winners in a statewide lottery. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Howard University, a master's and a PhD from John Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. He is a student of the Arabic language and has studied as a fellow at the American University in Cairo and as an associate at the Institute for African and Asian Studies at the University of Khartoum. He is married to Ann Sultan and has a proud parent of 3 adult children and the grandparent of 6 young children. And I'm going to give you your 5 minutes to plant your flag.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly. I have to say, it sounds like you're talking about a much older guy, but be that as it may, let me distill it to the pertinent reason for my participation in the panel. And that is the ownership of an I-502 retail store in Washington State. I-502 passed in 2012, which was the same year that Colorado passed Amendment 64, legalizing the cannabis industry in those respective states. They did so with the blessing of Eric Holder, who was then the Attorney General of the United States, and with a sort of yellow caution flag raised by then President Barack Obama. I-502 took off like a storm in Washington State, and everybody described the movement as the Green Rush, symptomatic of the California gold rush back in '49. But everybody could see money, money, money. And of course, the issue of the day was social equity and racial justice. There could not be a more stark example of the difference between the ideal and the real than the implementation of I-502. Ideally, it was intended to rectify the racial injustices that we all knew were associated with marijuana, in terms of the number of arrests, the people going to jail, the lives ruined, and the careers bashed, versus what was really a recreational pursuit. So the legalization of marijuana was expected to change all that. I have to say categorically that it did not. I closed my store a couple of years ago, and I don't think you will find very many Black retail owners throughout the state of Washington today. There's no mystery to that, because the way that the industry was established in Washington State was categorically unfair. To prove my point, I would commend to you a study done by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy under the authorship of Caseland Firth, who Caseland Firth is well, at that time was a graduate student at Washington State University. And he examined very carefully the data showing the number of arrests, the number of penalties associated with marijuana and law enforcement by race. And he found that the disparities that we knew so well between the number of people locked up and the number of people arrested on the basis of race before I-502 were mirrored almost exactly after I-502. So I-502 has not made the difference that it was touted to make when it was promoted as a referendum in Washington state. The fact of the matter is that although, as Kelly mentioned, I won my license as a participant in a lottery, there was a patent and inherent unfairness in the industry. And I think that is reflective of the unfairness in society at large. If you look at any industry and you look at the racial disparities in the success stories of the owners and the operators versus those who really want to participate, it could not be more stark. So the issue boils down to readiness. And when I-502 was implemented, there was a readiness on behalf of, how can I say this, many white people who were interested in seeing marijuana legalized. They had the capital, they had the network, they even had the product in many cases. Black people came into the industry with idealism, with hope, I dare say with romanticism about what they were going to be able to do. And the idea again was that of a quote unquote green rush. Rick Garza, who succeeded Merritt and changed the name of the board from Liquor Control to Liquor and Cannabis Board, spoke to this issue in an interview with the Victoria University in Canada, in which he described after 5 years of implementation of I-502, that the real purpose in the beginning was setting it up. And in order to set it up, it was all about compliance. So there was not this support network that you might expect. It was not the assistance that you might advocate to be provided to new owners or to owners of color and to, quite frankly, people who had no business experience, but they may have just won the lottery, to make this a successful enterprise to marshal. And so let me just say the state didn't care about that. The state was going to get its tax money regardless. And it did, and it has received the revenue. But if you look at the tales and the stories of those who entered the industry, whether they be a retailer like I was, a producer processor, or involved as a consultant in any other capacity, many of them failed, and they're failing now. The success stories are going to the big stores. You could not have a single license and be successful, although that was the ideal. So we set up what you might characterize in the old parlance as a mom and pop store. And you would have walked into my store and you would have said, this is really what it was all about. It had the feel. Like I'm feeling I'm almost out of time. So we would go ahead and say that it had the feel, and that was the ideal, and it is far different from the reality that came crashing down in the state.
Thank you, thank you. I see that Clinton is back. You're on mute. Would you like to take a few minutes to finish up your remarks? You are on mute.
So at the bottom, Clinton, yeah.
There you go. Oh, there you go. You're there.
Am I clear now? Yeah.
You are. You are.
I'm not going to go back to tell my whole story now because I had a whole story as it relates to social justice. And what we have done in this country have forced us as minorities and poor to believe that some of the laws that we're putting in place is there to help them. When I worked for state government, I saw the internal business of operation of $8.5 million. And a lot of times it was dealing with the employer.
Oh, I think you froze again.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Technology in pandemic is difficult. If you don't mind, Clinton, I think we're about at the point where we're going to open up for community questions. So I apologize. So we're going to welcome questions from attendees. And one of the things that I always ask is that our communication with each other is kind and respectful. You can write your question. If you see the Q&A button down at the bottom, you can click on that and write your question. As moderator, I will ask that of the panel. To save time, I will be looking for similar questions, themes. I may reframe for clarity. And if I think a question needs some follow-up, then I might ask that as well. Also, I'll want to remind folks that the City Council is here like you are to listen and learn, so they will not be fielding questions. Your questions, all the questions will be captured and sent to council afterwards. But we will not be asking questions of council in this. We'll be asking and hearing from the panel only. So I will start off with a question to get you started as we look at these things. Look at the questions are coming in from our folks. But here's one I'd like you all to sort of speak to, and I think it kind of covers a lot of what you guys have been talking about. And it's about economic mobility. So the traditional American dream is built around the idea of economic mobility, that you can rise above and improve your economic circumstances through hard work, education, luck, what have you. I'd like you guys to chat about how is that playing out along racial lines? How is that playing out for the Black community and people of color? And whoever wants to go first, I will let you guys fight it out. I'll help if I can.
Economic mobility has veritably been suffocated by institutionalized racism. And it has to do with readiness and fairness as much as anything else. And so from K-12 through higher education in our educational delivery system and in our economic development system, there have been no changes made in the old adage that you have to do better, you have to work harder, you have to go further if you're a person of color than if you're not. That's institutionalized, it's systematized, and it hasn't changed.
Anyone else on this topic?
This is Merritt. I'll add a couple things to that. A good friend of mine, Bill Moore here in Olympia. Oh, Clint can't hear me. Go ahead, Clint.
No, I was just simply going to say
Go ahead.
that I am still trying to figure out how do you separate social injustice from the other things that are going on within our society. Because you see, I have watched us operate over the years, and I've found out where some of the corners are where we can have success, but we're not on the inside to take advantage of what we're learning. And if we don't learn from these guys, they're going to keep doing what they do to us with injustice, because we're spending our time in one area when we got to spend our time in multiple areas. And we got to have the expertise to go with it. And when I worked for state government, I had $8.5 billion. But I also saw what happened to that, some of the monies that was to go to the poor and the
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm sorry. You slipped away again, Clinton, just when you're making like this incredible point. I'm so sorry.
I know.
Yeah. Merritt, would you like to finish?
With what Clinton was saying about having lived experience at the table, no matter what and this kind of goes to what James was talking about too, about the implementation around 502. If you don't have the voices of people in those communities, you can't create policies that are equitable. So if we didn't put voices at the table of people who are already involved with marijuana when 502 passed, how can we create policies that we're going to benefit everybody equitably? Or because you don't know what the need is. You can't determine what the need is if you don't know how to fix any of those solutions. So we have to, in government, we have to stop thinking that we know what's best for these communities. We have to bring them to the table and let them speak like you're doing right now. It's only by hearing and listening to the people that are actually impacted by these things, can we begin to make any difference? And it doesn't matter what you focus on. And it like Clint was saying, it touches everything. So there's not one special segment that's devoted to social justice or economic justice. It touches everything. Just like how the history, the laws in our histories, historical came together to create the situation we're in right now. It can't be separated.
Thank you. Merritt, did you have any more to add?
Yes, just a couple of things. The first one was Jim reminded me of a comment that Bill Moore made to me once, and he said something to the effect of Bill lives here in Olympia, retired military, worked in state government, retired as a colonel, and he's a Tuskegee grad, but we won't hold that against him being a Tuskegee grad. But anyway, Bill said to me, he said, Mira, you know, affirmative action and equality will be when Black folks and other folks of color can be promoted like average white people, i.e., why do we always have to be the superstar? Why is it that we have to be the person or persons who have to have these multiple talents when all of us have been in situations when we've had peers or even supervisors for that matter who were white who could hardly cut the mustard? And as Jim said, to some degree, that still is the case, you know, in the sense of having to get up a little earlier, stay a little later, and do what you got to do. And I'm not trying to say that anyone wants to move down with their skill set or to quote unquote be at the 70% level. I'm just saying that we all want to be looked at in a work situation or management situation the same way, equally, as opposed to a special something oftentimes with Black folks and other people of color when they are in positions of authority and power. And then the last comment I want to make is, and this one it gets really involved, and I'm just going to touch on it because it's too involved to try to dissect today, but I'll use the banking industry and I'll talk about members of board of directors of banks. I mean, how many people that on this panel or in the audience know someone who is on a corporate bank board, a board where those individuals sit, high and fire the president, help set the overall tone for the bank and raising money for the bank, et cetera, et cetera. And I raise that from a person of color standpoint because I've been at national meetings with bankers, and typically it's me and maybe two other people out of several hundred. And that often boils down to connectivity and who you know and who knows you, respects you, and how you can get a referral to someone to be considered. Because if you don't know the right people, you don't, I mean, I've never seen an announcement that said, here's a bank director's position open, please apply. It's an inside job.
Thanks. Hey, we've got a question from the community, and I think it goes to this conversation. Given what we've witnessed with I-502, how can we prevent racism from poisoning new economic initiatives aimed at redressing opportunities for jobs and new businesses?
Could you repeat that, Kelly, please?
Sure. Given what we witnessed with I-502, how can we prevent racism from poisoning new economic initiatives aimed at redressing opportunities for jobs and new businesses?
Well, I think, if I may speak first, it requires a radical readjustment of the system that's in place now. And it is a have-not system. Again, there were cohorts who were ready to go as soon as the gate was lifted with I-502. They had the product, they had the network for processing, they had the experience, and they had the capital. Now, we're trying to adjust for the sake of equity. And that's not a snap, crackle, and pop, forgive my age, but that's not a snap, crackle, and pop proposition. You've got to be able to re-monitor the entire system. People need the network, they need the support, And they need the opportunities that the current structure is not allowing. And that's very difficult. It's easy for me to sit here and recommend. I'm out of the business. But if you're in there, there is going to be a real food fight over the economic opportunity. And it is antithetical to the expectation embodied in the phrase green rush.
And I would add to that, James, I think it's a really great example that you bring up with I-502, because think about not only who was available, but who was barred from participating, right? So what laws and policies did we create that allowed some people entry and some people were excluded? A lot of people who had previous drug offenses for selling marijuana or possession of marijuana, they were barred from participating. Right, so you have this inequity already. Now we've approved it. It's no longer against the law. But if you have a felony, which a lot of these felonies were for drug possession, you couldn't even participate in this process. You couldn't even enter into the lottery. So we have to, I think, this is why it's important to listen to the community. You know, all of us enter this world with a partial experience, a partial perspective. We don't know it all, and it's not even fair to expect that one of us should know it all. We don't have all the answers. This is why diversity of thought is so important. When you get people from different experiences, you have different perspectives to consider. If you're missing key demographics, your solutions are not going to be applicable for them. They're going to fall short, and that's going to create more inequity. We need people with apparent and non-apparent disabilities. We need people with ethnic and racial differences, all and different, genders, sexual identity, all those different demographics. We need those people in some part participating in the process when we come up with these policies. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good our will is, and it has nothing to deal with whether we're a good or bad person. We're just able to see experiences that we don't live.
Thank you.
I think that Merritt's example of the bank board is germane here because it has to do with who's going to be in the room when the decisions are made.
Right.
And if you're going to have input on this, and you don't have anybody who are from the most affected populations in that group, they're going to be left out. There is legislation before the Washington State legislature right now in bill form geared toward rectifying the situation. And I doubt whether it goes anywhere because it's going to be a huge food fight over awarding more licenses. And people are not going to want more licenses because that is going to cut into the profit. I'm sorry to cut you off, Merritt. You want to
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Well, just in fact, what I wanted to do now, Jim, I was going to add to Megan's comment and also to yours from this perspective, and that is Megan talked about diversity of thought, talked about having different perspectives, different demographics involved in the decision-making process. And what I was about to say before I heard that, but it fits perfectly, and that is we need to be, as Jim just stated, in the room or at the table, whether that's at the state legislature, whether that's at the congressional level, whether that's at the city council, county council, but to be involved and be involved in decision making, not just providing input to the policy, but providing the guidance and direction to the staff who's helping the city or the county or the state make the policy. So we need to move to the other side of the table or at the head of the table along with others to help make those decisions that influence our various communities, as opposed to having to go to someone else to make your case.
I want to make sure we dropped Clinton's video in the hope that we would be able to hear him. So I want to make sure that we're including him in this conversation. Clinton, if you could hear us and you have something to say.
Yes, I do. And I agree with what Merritt just said. What is happening with us that I have seen that is really detrimental to the poor and to the minorities, we haven't got ourselves in the room. And we only hear the thoughts of people as they see them when they come out of that room. And over the years of my 85 years of living, I have finally got in that room to find out what was going on that made a difference in my life and my grandchildren's life. I had to be there to help make a change. And I put myself in a position so that change. Let me show you just a little story, and that is this. When they tore down the slums of Chicago, they tore them down and they put the same people back in. Now, what's wrong with that? Because you know what they'll say? They'll come back and say, oh, look at what we did for them, and look at how they treated it. They didn't do anything about changing the mindset of the capabilities of the people they put back in. They didn't educate them. They didn't get them jobs. They didn't do nothing. So how could it be a difference? It's the same way with us today, and we are much smarter. We're not going to let them keep us out of the room anymore, because it's in the room that we're going to be making decisions for our grandchildren and our children. And if we don't get in that room, we're going to be sitting out here talking about social injustice until we stop breathing. In that room is where we have to be. And I finally got in that room and I understood, because I made some difference. And the other thing is, when you talk about policies and laws, we need to find some champions, some good ones, some people that can read the law and talk the talk and do the things that are necessary that will make the difference for all of us. But we got to train and got to identify the champions to help us work through this deficit we have in our social behavior. We got to do it. We don't do it, we're going to be doing the same thing 100 years from now. It doesn't matter.
Thank you, Clinton. I've got a whole bunch of really wonderful questions and more time than we have questions, but there's one that's sort of a theme that I'm kind of seeing, and it's about Olympia, and really how can we create fertile ground in Olympia for Black people and people of color to prosper here and grow businesses, be entrepreneurial? What are the opportunities? What are the barriers? What are the actions that can be taken? Anyone?
Let me say
Well,
this from Clinton. I'll say what I have done is different now. I have built myself a relation. My wife and I have built ourselves a relationship with the city council. And what is key about that is I am now being able to talk about some things and get some action perhaps on some things I couldn't when I was sitting out on the outside. Sitting on the outside, I'm not even getting a breath of air. What I need to do is be on the inside, and I finally got into the inside, my wife and I, and we got someone that we can trust and build a relationship that will help make a difference in this community we live in. You can't make a difference until you're on the inside.
Well, Kelly, go ahead, Megan.
Well, I was just going to say that I was recently talking to Mike Reed, who's in charge of the economic development. And one of the good things I can say is that they had, there's data on the demographics of poverty and what Olympia looks like. And I think that that's a start. You can't fix something that you haven't measured to see where the gaps are. And so I think that's a really important work. I think that that needs to be a part of the conversation. What does the data say? But we can't rely on our own understanding to interpret the data. We have to make sure we have people from different experiences to help and explain the data, the qualitative and quantitative data, stories and numbers. That's how you really get an understanding of what's happening in a community. And then you can figure out where the barriers are and what needs to happen. So those are the things that need to happen first before you can take any action. To me.
I could not agree with you more. What gets measured gets done. And people understand that. To the extent that you publicize the data, you magnify the visual of the inequity, and you have to correct that. And then reality jumps in and says, this is a state that still hasn't moved forward since the passage of I-200. So anything you would do to answer Kelly's question, or the question that she articulated, in terms of setting up a target of opportunity program, in terms of, oh, don't strike me lightning, setting up an affirmative action program, in terms of doing anything that would intentionally rectify the situation, you're going to hit a brick wall. And we're fooling ourselves with making those recommendations and ever forgetting that, because the opposition is automatic and there hasn't been anything done. I come from a background in higher education where we fought over diversifying the faculty. Good luck with that. We fought over diversifying the student body. Good luck with that. Now you're talking about the economy and diversifying the business owners. I think that was the question. You can't run that.
Well, there's a particular quote that I wanted to have on hand today that came to mind, and with Jim, your comment and Megan's comment, I will read it. It's very short, and it comes from a gentleman who was called Lord Kelvin, 1883. And what he said was, when you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in numbers, you indeed know something about it. But when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. And I'll take that and give an example, a hypothetical, possibly for the city of Olympia, because earlier I talked about access and opportunity. I think about the city as a business center of sorts, in addition to the services it provides to its citizenry, i.e. your purchasing of pens and paper, city cars, police cars, the gamut of infrastructure support, computers, different software. I mean, you purchase X amount, millions of dollars every year. And my question will be to the city, whether that be the city of Olympia or the county of Thurston, show me your budget, show me how you're spending your money, and that will tell me what your priorities are. It would be interesting to see who the city of Olympia is doing business with. Is it all predominantly white-owned businesses? Is there a smattering of white-owned businesses? And is there a minuscule number of businesses of color that are there? And if not, why not? And what can the city do about that? Because the other something, and I'll end on this note for this particular portion, is I remember when Marsha and I started the Learning Seed Foundation almost 20 years ago. The first thing that we decided to do was that we wanted to make a sizable contribution to get the foundation started, because I didn't want to approach Dr. Peirce or Denny Heck or Fred Goldberg or whoever we approached about money to support scholarships for students unless we had skin in the game. So I think if the city of Olympia is going to play a role in the racial justice arena, the city has to look at itself and to see how it's carrying out its business and what can it do to improve that, so that when if it chooses to move forward with various initiatives, the city can say, this is the process that we went through, these were our issues, and this is how we approach some of them. I hope that was...
When you look at the racial imbalances in economic development in Olympia or in the state of Washington, there's a tendency to be complacent about that. There's a tendency to assume it's a product of evolution. It just happened that way. And we have so few Blacks in business, and we have so few Blacks in education because they weren't qualified and they weren't prepared, and that's just the breaks. We all know that's not true. And I want to say that it won't be changed. It certainly won't be rectified by evolution. It's not going to be reversed by anything other than purposeful action. And you have to be intentional, you have to be public, and you have to be unapologetic about it. We have never been willing to do that.
I would, if after slavery, racism stopped, I think we'd be in a different situation right now. Reconstruction, I think that's important for people to go back and look at what happened during Reconstruction, which was a period right after the Civil War, where Black people became millionaires, owned lots of property, created towns that were thriving. And after Reconstruction, through the KKK, through Jim Crow, which we've talked about some of the panelists who've lived through that, robbed, stole, murdered a lot of Black people. And then housing policies that prevented Black people from owning homes, that took resources out of those communities, that left them impoverished, where you're seeing now the divide where, you know, minority towns, areas, populations don't have as much, and where more white neighborhoods are thriving. That's all because of segregation, and that's all if you can look at history. So Jim is very right. We can't, we're not going to evolve our way out of this. When we're retiring, we're not talking about necessarily saying stick a Black person there. We don't want tokenism. We're talking about reevaluating our values when we're hiring. What does best fit mean? What is best candidate? What is best? Those are subjective terms. So if we're not, we value someone with a different perspective because of what they can bring. As Merritt was saying, you have Black people who feel like they have to have so many different degrees just to qualify for a position, and are still not getting hired, right? So it's evaluating our biases in the hiring process and what we say are the values, what we value when we're going to hire people, and being cognizant of the fact that we're not in this situation because we evolved this way. It was set through intentional policies, intentional laws that created situations, and we have to do the right thing. We have to do the right thing. We have to educate ourselves on our history, our full complex history, and that's the only way we're going to get ourselves out of this situation.
Right. Well, I was in a situation, it's been a while, but not that long ago. I was being interviewed for a senior level position with this agency, and I did very well in the interview. And fortunately, a friend of mine was in the room, Jim, with the others who were interviewing me and the 4 other candidates for this position. And he gave me some of the backstory about what people said about me after I finished my interview. And the concern was that I was overqualified for the job, and that I wasn't going to be satisfied in my job. I was going to want my boss's job. I mean, it's like, what, you know? I mean, it was, what can I say? You know, either you're not qualified or you're overqualified, but just, I did get an offer, et cetera, et cetera. I turned it down, but if I wouldn't have known that unless I had this gentleman just to share with me what the discussion was, and if he probably hadn't been in the room to mitigate some of that discussion, I probably would have been overqualified and dismissed as a candidate.
You would have never known.
So can I just, we are enjoying the conversation so much that we're actually going to push the council out a little for a couple, got the okay from the mayor to continue the conversation a little longer before you guys got to my question that I gave you ahead of time. But but there are a couple other questions. And I think you touched on it, Megan, from our community. Someone asked if you guys can talk about housing as it relates to economic justice.
Housing is huge, and that's one of the strategies we talk about in the state plan. You know, the truth of the matter is rental prices have increased, the cost of living has increased, rent prices have increased astronomically, way more than income has. So what you would have been able to afford in the 70s, 80s, you can no longer afford. We know that we don't have enough housing for people. And I know that Olympia, I think it was the missing middle, is trying to figure out ways to do that. I think that we need to have more conversation about what's gonna give us what we need, because what we don't want is more housing built that's not affordable, right? I know some of the problems, you know, we have to look at other, what other states, cities, jurisdictions are doing as well as solve some of these problems, because I was reading this study when I was in school about Reno. And they had people who were on the streets and they'd have to go to the ER because they caught a cold, they were sick, something happened. Well, they decided to put them in apartments. And by putting them in apartments, it saved them ER trips, right? So in the long run, the city benefited because they put people in housing. So we have to look at all models. What makes most business sense? I think one of the panelists was talking about, look at it as a business. Is it going to save Olympia in the long run to house people than to deal with the fallout from not housing people? And whether you're sympathetic to people who are living without homes or not, maybe it's just the best, smartest business expense if that's not kind of what's going to get you motivated.
Well, I think Olympia has been careful in recent years, if not throughout its past, about sensible growth. And the term of art, I guess, is smart growth. The idea is not to grow for its own sake, but to grow in a sense that it would be sustainable. And I've heard that more often than not. I think it's a very good guiding principle. You have to be able to integrate affordable housing into the same macro overview you have of the city's growth as you do with business development, as you do with industrial development, as you do with small business development. That's easy, again, to preach, but it's hard to implement in practice.
I'd like to make sure if Clinton has something to say on this topic, I want to make sure you're in here. Just because I don't see you, I'm thinking about you. Nope, I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, all right. Anything else, Merritt?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Another question, because I'm on a roll here. Leadership development takes time and support. What was key to your success in this regard? What does our community need to do better to foster these kinds of supports?
Well, personally, I was lucky. You know, I always think that, you know, there wasn't anything special about me. I was just given access. Somebody took the time to mentor me, to help me grow, help me see. My parents laid a strong foundation. They said, you know, we know you're gonna go to college. So I did what I could. I got good grades. I worked. I played sports. I was very active. And without someone taking time to help me complete the FAFSA, to help me complete college applications, help me find the waivers and complete waivers for application fees, because there's fees for college applications. I wouldn't have went to college, and I don't know what my life would look like right now. So we have to figure out, you know, if people are working hard, how do we make sure there's still not barriers to getting them where they want to be? And I think that's what we have to look at. Where are the barriers? But you're not going to have those. You're not going to understand those unless you're talking to the people with those lived experiences. And so I think we have to do more of that, intentionally reaching out to people. One of the things we're doing with the state of BUILD, that the Black Community Business Resource Group, is trying to figure out how do we mentor and help people grow. We know that there's a lot of cultural or behind the scenes ways that you can get promoted that aren't black and white rules that people don't always know. You know, and I think what Merritt was talking about, our networks are made up of people who mostly look like us. And so if we're not, when you're talking about executive level positions, senior level positions, if we're not in those networks, right, and our networks are pretty homogenous, we're not going to be the ones that are selected for different opportunities. And I think that we have to be aware. If you're someone who's at a senior level, you have to be aware of that. What am I missing from my network? I can't just recommend the person I know. Let me put it out there and see if I might get some other demographics that are represented, so I can evaluate and value diversity of thought.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, I hear Clinton. Yes, yes, Clinton.
Listen, I agree with what you just said, but you know something else I'm looking at that's awful, that hurts us. We have got to get people of color in our schoolrooms. We've got to get people of color having successful business and mentoring other people of color. We don't do enough of that, or we are not coordinated enough to make that a part of our existence. But we gotta do it. When I think about even the police of our city, and I have a connection there, I'm saying that we need more people of color in our police force. We're not getting what we need from where we are coming from. The diversity of what is in our environment is not in our society as a whole within this community. We need to do better. We haven't done better. And what I'm trying to do now, and my wife is trying to do, is trying to make sure that we start mentoring people to get in a position so that they can help others. It's awful important. It may sound kind of childish and schoolish, but it's the thing that's going to bring us home with the success we want to have, and our children should have.
Well, I think there are three things
Okay, I'm
if you want
sorry,
to
Jim.
make change in Olympia. One, there has to be a clear and unequivocal identification of the problem. And
Yes.
we have to be consensual about this, but there needs to be an understanding that something is broken. Otherwise, you're just getting busy and nobody's going to really pay attention to you. So if you have a problem identification that is universal, that is ideal. The second thing is you have to have measurable goals and objectives. As we were alluding to earlier, you have to be able to quantify your success. There may be some friction there may even be some politics there, but you have to be clear. If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. And the third thing is that you have to have consequences for not doing it. What happens if we don't do this? We have a feel-good meeting and we all talk about diversity, and like somebody said, we sing kumbaya, everybody goes out of the meeting feeling good. What are the consequences if you don't do it? 5 years from now, you'll be having the same meeting.
Just a couple of quick thoughts. Several things have come to mind. The most recent something is, about 4 years ago, I was downtown Olympia, and I just by chance ran into this guy by the name of Patrick Woods. And I first met Patrick when he worked as a staffer for, I think, the Senate Labor Committee. And our daughters went to high school together. We've known each other quite some time. And Patrick, for some reason, that particular day, we were talking about relationships and the importance of relationships. And Patrick said to me, he said, Merritt, when I have an orientation for new legislators, here's something that I tell them, that in your new role as a legislator, there's three things that govern your success. One is you have to play by the rules. Secondly, there are regulations that guide all of this, and you must understand it. But thirdly, unless you have the relationships with folks, you're going to be not very successful on the rules, on the regs, and whatever you want to do. I say that all to say, regardless of the discipline, whether that's technology, whether that's climate change, whether or not that's computer science, we are all in the relationship business.
Yes.
We are all in the relationship business. A good friend of mine told me 20 years ago when he and I first talked after he came to Olympia and he was heading up an agency, and his observation to me, and I took it to heart, was he said, Merritt, you need to expand your circle.
Right.
You need to get beyond the current group of people that you're consistently doing business with. And he was right, and I did. The third something is, and I love this one, I think I may have came up with it myself. Anyway. And that is, in our business dealings, in our social dealings, go where you are not expected. Go where you are not expected. Be in a different environment. You're going to meet different people. You're going to learn from that experience, and probably you may pick up a relationship connect that could help you down the road. So I just want to put a big R for relationships and the importance of relationships, regardless of whatever discipline or whatever you're trying to do. And there's one last one, because a mentor of mine, Jim Williams, who headed up the Seattle Opportunities Industrialization Center, told me once, and I took to heart then and still do, and he said, Merritt, you have to always seek counsel. You know, you want to get the best information from the best thinkers and the brightest, and have an array of thoughts on the issue or challenge, but you will ultimately make the decision. But you will have these filters, you will have these things to look at, whatever that is, and that's always served me well. So I just, on the whole topic of leadership, those are some of the things, Kelly, that come to my mind that I would like to pass along.
All right, it is time for the homework question. And I know y'all have thought about it. What does long-term sustainable change look like, and what is the work to get there? And whoever wants to, maybe we can ask Clinton to go first, since I don't want to make sure we don't forget him.
Take that again.
What does long-term sustainable change look like, and what is the work to get there?
I think the long-term extendable change would be that we need to stop looking at yesterday and start looking at tomorrow. Too much of us we spend too much time looking backwards on what has happened to us. It's not going to take us any place. We need to look forward, and we need to learn to plan effectively. And Merritt says some good things here. One is we got to learn the matter of leadership. Two is we got to learn how to plan to have the successes and understand what it is we want to do. And three is we need to understand that we got to set goals, both internal and external. And we got to build relationship with all sort of people. The white ones, the black ones, the brown ones, the yellow ones, and anybody else we can find that you want to have. We got to learn to build relationship, because those relationships is the power we need to get to the position that we're trying to move to. So it's very important. We may have to spend some time, and we got to learn some new things. Stop dealing with the old. It's not going to take you no place. In 85 years, I've seen it and heard it, and you can't tell me nothing I don't know about it. Because I've been there, and I'll tell you what, if we want to go someplace, it's wide open to us, but we got to see the wide openness and not let someone hinder us because they don't agree with us. Move on.
Thank you. All right, who wants to go next?
Well, I don't want to go next, but I just want to say, Clint, we have to talk after this, because if you are 85, we got to brand all the stuff you're eating and taking so that we can make sure that people like me can look as good as you when I'm 85. So we'll talk, okay?
I think that
All right,
long,
Megan?
go ahead, Megan.
Okay, I just took I wrote a couple of notes down. So I think we need to continue conversations where we create the environment to continue learning from one another and encouraging difficult conversations like the ones that we're having today in the following weeks. Embed strategies and goals in our strategic plans, track our objectives through data and metrics, use process improvement. We shouldn't be so concerned about perfection that we don't act. Involve lived experience in the decision-making process, and make sure that the values of our new hires are aligned with organization values, and that should be of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I would say we should strive to be. There is no middle road in this. Either you are a part of racist society and upholding the racist system, or you're going to be anti-racist. So there is no middle ground. You have to either be in, or either way you're a part of something. And so I think that we all have to decide what side we want to be on, and hopefully that's the side of the anti-racist organization, and take actionable steps towards doing that.
Thank you.
I think on long-term sustainable development looks like we have waged a successful war on poverty. If we have waged a successful war on poverty, we will have accomplished long-term sustainable development. What it will look like includes a changed infrastructure. We will have a stronger educational system, pre-K through graduate school. We will have a stronger, more interconnected system of economic development with a support network in place to help small businesses and corporations both survive. And it will be a changed environment that is a livable environment for all segments of the population.
Thank you. Merritt?
I agree with my colleagues and fellow panelists today. I just say something I would add to that, and I touched on it as part of my 3 points, and that is commitment. I just think, again, I'm looking at this very city council centric, since you are the host of this event and the convener of this event. And the initiative and sustainability will only be as strong as the strength of your commitment to do what you think needs to be done and be able to hang in there through the short term and long term, because it will not be easy. It will not be a walk in the park. So I just think folks have to be serious about what they want to do. And if that happens, I think there can be results that are measurable, as my colleagues have talked about. But I'll hang my hat for now on the commitment side, because quite frankly, I don't know how serious, and I couldn't know how serious the city is. But I can tell, I can't say a lot or judge a lot from your words, but I can judge from your deeds and your actions.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't tell you how grateful I am for you guys for showing up for me. That's when I extended this invitation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor.
My gosh, I was writing so quickly and listening so hard. Is that a term, listening hard? I am just transported by all your words today. I'm just so touched that you would spend the time with us. And I know some of you personally, and I know it's hard to trust that there is going to be change this time. But I can guarantee you this isn't just about checking the box for this city council. We are fully committed to this work. The murder of George Floyd tore back a curtain of what was already there, but now the whole world is seeing it and this whole nation is seeing it. This is a unique opportunity that we do not want to waste this time. I'm kind of old enough to remember the late 60s and some of the changes that were put in place then. And I think that we are in that era, that type of upheaval. Our communities, our nations begging us for this change, and it needs to be sustainable. So please do not give up on the city of Olympia. We are, like I said, fully committed. One of the takeaways, I'm so glad you brought up mentorship, Megan, because that is something that, like you said, if you don't see yourself in the room, you don't know whether you can belong there. And just a tiny percent of me can relate as being female and never seeing myself in some of these rooms. And now I do, and it's definitely empowering. So whatever we can do to increase the mentorship, I know there's great programs in the schools through some of the nonprofits here, but we need more. And then building relationships. And I think Clinton mentioned about building relationships with the city council over, especially the last 5 years, when we really started engaging in some big work around racial equity. Definitely just a drop in the bucket of what we need to do. And then, what gets measured gets done. And so that's part of the work that we will be doing as a council, is figuring out what that dashboard is of how the metrics of what we can really change. I'm glad that a lot of our economic development leadership are listening, and specifically our own Mike Reed is here listening in the Zoom world. He tracks data better than anybody I've ever met or worked with. So we're in good hands there. And what I'd like to do, are all my council members? All right, can I see my council? There they are. All right. Is my sound weird? I don't know what happened to my sound. Is it better now?
It's better.
Cool. All right. So what I'd like to do is open it up to my council members for some closing comments or if they have additional questions. So the first one on my screen I see is Clark.
Thank you, Cheryl. So first, I just also want to speak to the committing to not using this process or your time and energy as window dressing. And I realize that the proof is in our actions, but I don't want to let you down. Two takeaways that were really helpful for me that were very specific were that Olympia might be a model for other businesses, both through looking at our purchasing and how we prioritize traditionally disadvantaged bidders. And also Megan's suggestion about redefining in personnel what is the best fit and who is the best candidate as we're both hiring and promoting. I think that's a real gem. And here's something that I want to plant as a seed. Maybe you have a reaction now, maybe it'll come later. But Lacey Council member Malcolm Miller recently spoke in a meeting where he said that after 20 years as a residential loan officer here in Thurston County, as a council person, he just had his first white realtor make a referral of a client to him.
Right.
What might Olympia do as a city to interrupt that pattern of just frankly people being afraid of Black people, to be really honest about it? And how could we help the next Malcolm Miller to have an equal chance at writing that loan for somebody to get into their home? What might a city do to intervene in that?
To me, some of this is about stereotypes that have lasted forever. And so maybe the city can look into ways that they can change the narrative of who Black people are. Even right now, a lot of the messaging about Black Lives Matter is not spoken by Black people. It's interpreted by other people that causes really harm and is intended to divide and take away the sympathy for Black people right now. And we can't allow that to continue to play on people's biases that have been generational, transported generationally. And so to me, you know, maybe we could look at investing in things that change the narrative that the United States has told about who Black people are. And what we mean, and then just find ways to encourage people to interact. You know, one of the things in EDI work, equity, diversity, inclusion work, is about exposure. Exposing people who are different from them changes and challenges the thing of what we know. There's a really good, I think it's Let's Talk About Bias on the internet by Jesse Williams, I think. They just put out, and this is conversation between different people. And they're like, and you can just see the brain, most of the conversations, their light bulbs are going off because it's challenging what they think they knew about others. And it's across different demographics too. So maybe we could put together something like that or show that or something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else for Clark's question? There's definitely a lot of light bulbs going on right now, Megan, which is good. We need more light. I got Jim Cooper.
Thank you, Cheryl. I just want to express my heartfelt thanks. It's a big deal. You know, I can understand why Merritt was, you know, tentative about joining this panel, and I'm really thankful that you put yourselves out there to talk to us and frankly for just letting us learn from you. And it's not necessarily something that city council members always get the opportunity to do. We're often expected to be the voice in the room, and this is a nice change of pace for me, frankly. You know, I'm reminded of a quote, and I don't remember who said this, but your system is perfectly designed to get the outcomes you're getting. And that's where we are. And we know when we look at the data and shine a mirror on our community and our state and our nation, that when we disaggregate that data, you know, that we have to change the way and find better ways to make relationships and build relationships across the community so that we can redesign that system and thus change those outcomes. So thank you for being here and your insight into particularly around the thoughts around economic development and our economy. I think that you give us a good opportunity to continue this conversation as we think about how do we truly achieve equity for for all Olympians, whether it's about where they work and who they interplay with, or the bias, or whether they have housing or not. And we know that in all of those conversations, and we could add on healthcare and education and criminal justice, you know, all of you and your family are disproportionately affected. And I'm sorry for that. And I'm committing myself to working as hard as I can to change that. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I just heard from Lisa partially that she has problems with her video. So she wants to ask a question through her audio. So Lisa, if you want to unmute yourself.
I think I'm unmuted now. That's correct. I want to echo Councilmember Cooper's thank you. Oftentimes you have to listen, you have to shut your mouth. And as electeds, we tend to be the ones that have to speak. And these town halls have been fabulous. Thank you, Kelly. I have pages and pages in front of me. I'm like the mayor. I've been writing notes, and I have a question. It'll be for Megan, but I just want to repeat back what I've heard, and hopefully I've caught some of the messages. One is the commitment. I agree with you, Merritt. We have to be committed, and it's going to get hard, and it's going to be a marathon, and this is not a sprint, and we're going to hit opposition. Second, I heard we have to be purposeful. I agree. We have to be very purposeful. I love this. How, as a city, how are we doing business, and how could we potentially help mentor small businesses and other businesses of color? Love that. I'm a data wonk, and using data to find the barriers. And I think Megan said this several times, barriers. We have to get the people in the room to help us find those barriers, and then help us chart our way around the barriers instead of us expecting to know the answer how to do that. So that's fabulous. We have to have measurable goals. I think Dr. Sultan said this. We have to have clear and unequivocal recognizing of our problem, that we have a racist system and we have institutionalized racism in our group. When I put forward the Human Rights Commission, we're supposed to link all our referrals to our comprehensive plan. I couldn't find a single statement in our whole comprehensive plan, which is our strategic plan, that talks about equity, social justice, racial justice, anything. So we do have some things we have to get done. There's just so much more. But my question is, Megan, you started off in the beginning talking about all these points. And you started off with, there was 8 points. Could you just either send that to the council or, repeat them really quickly? Because I was trying to write them down and I missed some.
The strategies for the 10-year plan to reduce poverty and inequality. Yeah, and
Yes, please.
I can send you the draft plan so you can look through as well.
Yeah, it was a little bit garbled.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Megan, if you want to send those to me, I'll make sure they get to the council.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. Danny Madrone.
Hi, I really want to thank you all for your time and for sharing the truth of your experience. And, as Jim Cooper said, I also want to apologize for the harm that has been caused to you, especially by city government. And I know that there's a lot of work that we need to do to repair that harm. One of the big takeaways I took was the discussion around data. I'm a very data-driven decision maker, and we've got a lot of staff at the city who also think like that. A lot of people on council, and I was really struck by trying to tell the story of the data of the people you are measuring without those people in the room to share their personal experiences and what that data actually means. So I'm going to take that to heart. And I also really appreciated bringing housing into the conversation, because housing is such a big part of economic vitality and success. And we've had some very, very racist housing policies throughout our history and even currently in Olympia. And that's something I certainly want to work on. And so thank you all so much. Very, very grateful for your time. And I'm ready to get to work and take some action.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, I've got Jess Bateman, our Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I also want to thank you all for sharing your most important commodity, your time with us this evening. It was really amazing to hear your stories and your perspective and experience, and I truly value that. I think for me, the example of I-502 and the intent of that legislation and what we all thought it was going to be, how it was implemented and the impact that it had was a really great case study in basically what not to do for implementing policies that are equitable, because that one's such a glaring and obvious, you know, with the war on drugs and then the goal of providing an equitable opportunity for people that have been disproportionately impacted, and to see it fail so miserably. I'm really looking forward to that legislation hopefully passing, and I've heard some really positive things about it and some coalitions getting behind that so we can have more of those licenses for Black-owned businesses in our state. Some of the takeaways that I had, I think, Jim, your 3-point recommendation for how to create sustainable change is something that I'm going to put on a sticky note right next to my desk, because you could apply that to literally every single government policy that we are trying to accomplish. We absolutely need to know what the problem is, measure our goals and objectives, be able to quantify our success, and have consequences for not doing it. There are plenty of examples of, including our Growth Management Act and housing policy and expectations that we will create enough housing. And as we talked about earlier, we clearly don't have enough. I'm also, like Councilmember Madrone, very interested. One of the questions we got from a constituent was on housing. And we talked a little bit about rental housing and more housing, but Black home ownership is now lower than it was when redlining was outlawed. And what can we do to provide additional opportunities and reduce barriers for Black home ownership? Because we all know that the wealth gap is not changing, and that's one opportunity that we have for people to get equity and to pass that wealth along to their families. So that's something that I'm very much interested in looking into. But I think another takeaway that I had was we have to have the people in the room a part of these discussion. Going back to I-502 as an example, you know, as we move forward in this process, I too am committed and recognize this is going to be for it to be sustainable, it's going to be a long-term process for us to understand the harm that has been caused, the education that will be involved in that, the connection with people, the anti-bias work, anti-racism work that's going to be involved, not only for us as elected officials, but also for our community that has varying levels and degrees of understanding about this issue. And if we want it to be sustainable, we're going to have to do that work, and it will be uncomfortable and long-term. So I applaud you for giving us your time tonight. I can understand some hesitancy and some skepticism in doing that. And I truly appreciate the communication that you've shared with us tonight. And I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Renata Rollins, council member.
Hey, thank you. I really, thank you so much to the panelists, Kelly. I really appreciated the honesty spoken to. This just felt, this was really meaningful to me. Some of the themes that I wrote down was the importance of knowing our history and as that being a path for getting out of this situation that we're in today, which is totally undesirable, and using that history to guide us towards a shared future. Of course, as has been mentioned, having more people with lived experiences of racism and of poverty and of opportunity denied at our tables, in the rooms, ideally so that we're building a system that doesn't have like in the room and outside of the room dynamic, but so it's one thing. The comment about from Merritt about you know, I can tell you what's important to your organization by looking at your budget. Budgets are moral documents, and we're going to have difficult decisions to make for 2021. It's a difficult environment for local governments because our revenues are really challenged, and I just hope that we're all as has been reflected, as has been said, just really here and committed to to make the courageous actions. A word that I didn't hear in this conversation, but that kept coming to mind is reparations and what that means for a community. And just being, I guess being real that this is what this is about. This is about not only righting wrongs of history, but lifting us all up, starting with centering those who have been most marginalized and most oppressed and kept out. But as a path towards lifting us all up. But repair is a big part of that. And so I'm really curious to see, especially when it comes to maybe supporting business ownership opportunities for Black people, property ownership, housing land trusts or farm trusts that are available for Black people to start leveling the playing field more, so that we're all able to really benefit from our shared prosperity. And that's I guess, then I'll leave it at that. I don't think I have, I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I think I'll just leave it there. You've been really generous with your time. And I think it's really on us to not only show commitment, but show the courage to live up to those commitments. And if we're not doing things very differently, then we're probably not doing it right. So I look forward to the continued learning with all my colleagues and city staff and members of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I miss anybody on council? I think I got all my council mates. It's good to see you guys. I look forward to maybe someday being in the same room with you again. So that concludes our second town hall. And I want to thank again Kelly Purse-Brosseth for coming up with this is her brainchild, and pulling together all these amazing panelists for us, including tonight's panelists, Megan Matthews, Merritt Long, James Sultan, and Clinton Petty. And I also want to remind people that we have 2 more town halls the next 2 Thursdays. Next week on Thursday, August 6th, we're into August already. It'll be racial justice and the healthcare system. And again, it'll be, the link will be available on our city website as well as our Facebook page, so you can register. And just again, reminding people that we have multiple crises going on right now, not the least of which is COVID. And I want to make sure that everybody stays healthy so we can have conversations going forward. We need everybody at the table safe and healthy. So wear your mask and wash your hands. Oh, Megan, did you have
Is it okay if I really wanted to read this statement, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So the late Congressman Don Lewis wrote a message right before he passed that was published today, and I wanted to read a couple of things that picked up from that I thought was really relevant today. So first, he was quoting Martin Luther King Jr. He says, each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, speak and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and a world at peace. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it is your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Thank you very much for letting me do that.
Thank you. Perfect.
I don't need to say another thing. That was beautiful said, and a great way to close this time together. So we'll see you around town, folks.